The Dallas Stars are the number two team by ESPN Bet to win the Stanley Cup. Brian Ray joins us from Valley Sports Southwest in Dallas. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing good, and for as boring as the month of August is, I'm kind of glad Doug Armstrong threw some chaos into the wind here. We've been waiting for something to chomp our teeth on, so this is going to be fun for the next 7 days or so.
Yeah, it really is. Is this a case of the Blues kind of waiting until the dog days of summer to try and, catch the Oilers sleeping in the grass a little bit like a snake in the grass? It's kind of woken up the hockey world.
I don't know if it's a waiting situation. I've always wondered, why don't we get more offer sheets? And look, I'm selfish working in media covering hockey. You want stories, you want a little bit of drama, some theatrics, and we just don't get enough of that, especially going back to the Habs and the Canes a couple of years ago and their offer sheet pettiness that I think we all enjoyed watching between the two. But I've always wondered with offer sheets, just the way the economics have gone, okay, the upper class is clearly going to get its money, because that's just the high-level players. But as that's sort of increased and we're getting more and more double-digit AAV salaries, we keep seeing the middle class get squeezed a little bit, and there's more onus and importance being put on entry-level contracts and RFA-level players to try and fill out these rosters. So I've always wondered, at some point, why isn't this turning and we're seeing more offer sheets either to acquire RFA-aged players or RFA-level players in terms of salary because of how important those players are becoming to fill out rosters, combined with trying to put the squeeze to a fellow GM or another team out there and handcuff their cap situation a little bit. So I've always wanted a little more RFA traffic. I think if you're a hockey fan, you love to see it as long as it doesn't happen to your team. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on here between the Oilers and the Blues. But I'm glad we're getting a little more RFA traffic. I like seeing it. I think it's fun.
I think it's great. And we're talking about two young players that were both first-round picks, high upside depth pieces right now for an Oilers Stanley Cup run. What do you do if you're the Oilers? They're $300,000 over the salary cap, which you can be 10% over. But what do you do if you're the Oilers right now?
If you're Edmonton and you're determining your window right now is to win a Stanley Cup, if those two guys are a legitimate part of it, then obviously you want to bring them back into the fold. I honestly don't know what you do, because there's also this mitigating circumstance named Leon Draisaitl that is just hovering out there. And it feels like you're going to need every dollar and penny you can find to get him locked up. So are Broberg and Holloway going to lock up some of those pennies that you need to try and hold on to Leon Draisaitl over the next couple of years, or not? Look, it's a really difficult situation to be put in. It's why Doug Armstrong made the move. And I'm talking to you from Dallas. I cover the Dallas Stars on a daily basis, so let me throw a Dallas Stars thread into this. If I'm Thomas Harley, who's an RFA for the Dallas Stars that they are trying to get signed right now, and I see that there's a defenseman around the same age, former first-round pick, who's just had an AAV of roughly $4.5 million presented in front of him, I'm Thomas Harley saying, look at my body of work. That's where my number starts, right there. There's my market if we're looking for the number that Thomas Harley wants to re-sign at with the Dallas Stars. So from a Dallas perspective, there is a little bit of an interest to see what goes on here with this offer sheet and it getting matched, because now you're talking about a marketplace for a skilled young defenseman, former first-round pick, who's also waiting to be re-signed from the Dallas Stars side of things.
Yeah, and another angle to this is, this is a team in the division in St. Louis. From a Dallas perspective, they finished fifth in the division last year. They were 6 points back of the playoffs, but 7 points back of fourth in that division. Where is St. Louis at, and what are the Blues trying to accomplish here?
So that's a great question, because I've kind of wondered, what are the Blues trying to accomplish over the last couple of years? They're clearly trying to retool while maintaining their competitiveness in the division. And they've essentially missed the playoffs the last couple of years because of it, but they're still trying this retool on the fly. And we saw Dallas do this a little bit, but Dallas also, call it getting a little bit lucky the way they hit on that draft with Robertson and with Stan Coven and with Jake Ottinger and some of these players they were able to find in later rounds that really blossomed. I think every division likes to say that they are the toughest division to deal with. I've covered the Central Division basically head on for the last 6 years now. And I'm sitting here going, all right, last year it was Dallas, it was Colorado, it was Winnipeg, and Nashville was there a little bit. Well, then Nashville goes and makes their moves. St. Louis is clearly trying to make themselves a little bit stronger. Arizona/Utah seems to be this wild card of young talent wondering what are they actually going to bring, especially with some of their offseason signings. I still view St. Louis outside of that bubble, maybe around that 5th, 6th range. But you were talking about longest odds or great odds in your last segment to try and win the Stanley Cup or to be playoff teams. There's always just sort of a wild card team that can throw a wrench into the mix. I'm not convinced St. Louis is that team yet. It's probably more leaning towards Utah, but I do think the Central Division has become a little bit deeper with some of these teams and maybe not as top heavy as they were last year. And I haven't even said Winnipeg with the players they have and some of the top end talent. So from a Central Division perspective, I think a lot of us are looking at the Central and just saying, all right, get ready for the black guys and the broken teeth because it's going to be that type of a division again over the course of an 82-game season. I think St. Louis is outside of the bubble still, but I do think they are stronger, making the division more difficult.
You're right. Arizona's kind of interesting. Minnesota is the team that, feels the least interesting in the division.
Yeah.
And you got Chicago at the bottom that are only going to get better with Bedard and adding more young talent as kind of the next group. But like Dallas was first, then Winnipeg 3 points back, Colorado and Nashville. It's probably those 4 teams that are going to be 1 through 4, maybe in a different order this year.
I agree.
I don't know where St. Louis fits into that. They almost need to kind of buy their time and let those 4 kind of finish their window and then kind of hope you're in the next window with Chicago and Arizona. And it's a tough spot to be because that's a really competitive division.
And I think also something that a team like St. Louis, if Kyrou and Thomas somehow take another step and develop into this really heavy 1-2 punch, there's been flashes of it, I feel like, the last couple of seasons, but now they have those big money contracts they signed a couple of years ago. That kind of changes the look of St. Louis. But this is sort of the question mark with young players. There's always inconsistency for the most part until it clicks and they get it, or it never clicks and they don't get it. And so it's one of those, it feels like St. Louis is one of those teams that's trying to rebuild, maybe not necessarily their farm system, but that next wave of young talent to their core. They're trying to rebuild their core, essentially, is what they're doing. Dallas was able to do it a couple of years ago with their young players. Arizona, it feels like they're in the process of doing that. They've had a lot of those first-round picks and high-level talent they've been stockpiling. And one of these teams, Nashville, they kind of rebuilt it through free agency, not necessarily young talent. But one of these cores, it's going to click, and then it's going to make life awfully difficult for who has been the cream of the crop of the division so far between Colorado, Dallas, and Winnipeg was in that conversation. You're right. It's 1 through 4 looks set, but 5 and 6 are certainly trying to make life really problematic.
Clark, I want to bring up those NHL futures odds again, where we had the Edmonton Oilers first, the Dallas Stars as the number 2 team in terms of odds to win the Stanley Cup. Let's look at, before we let you go, this Dallas Stars team and the offseason that they had. Joe Pavelski's out. But they made some small moves. It seems like, for the most part, a quiet offseason. But is this Stars team better today than they were at the end of the year last year?
So I would classify the Stars offseason as incomplete. And this is really funny. While I'm talking to you, the notification just popped up on my phone, the Stars announcing that they've signed goaltender Magnus Hellberg to a 1-year deal. So there's your number 3 in the Dallas Stars system and another ancillary move in terms of to pick up their depth. But I think today, right now, if you look at the roster, are they better than what they had at the end of the playoffs last year? I think it's a fair argument to say no. When you lose Chris Tanev, that's tough. When you lose Joe Pavelski to retirement and even Ryan Suter a little bit to his buyout, that's tough. But if you look at the Dallas Stars that began last season, there were a lot of these similar question marks. And Jim Nill is big on depth and he's big on internal strides forward. And that's what he's banking on here a little bit. Maverick Bourque is now going to make his jump, it feels like, from the American League being the MVP of the AHL to the NHL. He put the same faith in Wyatt Johnston a couple years ago. He put the same faith in Logan Stankoven halfway through last season. He's going to put that same faith in Maverick Bourque, who has earned this opportunity and earned a little bit of that trust to try and make a step like that. That's a question mark that could be a heck of a game changer, but it remains to be seen. I do think there are still question marks on the blue line. There were question marks with a 39-year-old Ryan Suter. You take him out of the mix and you bring in Lyubushkin, you bring in Matt Dumba, who also have their question marks, but they're younger, they're a little bit meatier. So can Jim Nill strengthen his fifth and sixth defenseman a little bit and maybe lift the back end of his defensive pairing? It's great if it works, but there's question marks there. I think this is going to be a big-time trade deadline for Jim Nill after he determines what exactly he has, and some of those questions have either been answered or not answered. Sitting in the weeds of all this is Thomas Harley is an RFA that needs to be re-signed. If you're a Stars fan, I don't think you need to worry or panic. There's a lot of RFAs out there in the NHL that are still unsigned by their teams. This is just the way business is being done right now in the National Hockey League. So I'm calling this Stars offseason incomplete because there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered. Very similar to what they did last year, but they're kind of rolling it back and playing that same game again. The trade deadline, I think, is where we're going to learn where is this team at with some of those future bets you were just talking about and a Stanley Cup push.
And it should be a lot of fun to watch. And it feels like the unofficial start to the new season is summer is over. We are back to hockey. Brien, I appreciate this. Enjoy what's left of the summer, and we'll see you next time.
Same to you guys. Good to talk as always.
Brien Reyes from Bally Sports Southwest, Victory Plus TV, new Dallas Stars broadcaster internally. Brien Reyes, always a pleasure, and a great summary of the moves in the Central Division. Again, offer sheets coming down. The St. Louis Blues offer sheeting the Oilers' Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg.